Arguably the most anticipated chapter ever in DBD is the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter. This was confirmed back in August of this year and is currently scheduled to release at some point in 2025. Right now, we don't have too much information regarding the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter. All we really know is that it has been confirmed, so other details regarding which animatronic will release as the killer is still completely up in the air. If I did have to guess, I'd say Springtrap would be the animatronic of choice to feature as a killer in the upcoming DBD chapter. However, it could also easily be Freddy Fazbear, or perhaps even a chapter with 2 killers rather than just 1. It's also possible that Springtrap could be the killer for this chapter, with legendary skins for the likes of Freddy, Foxy, and Bonnie. Hopefully, we do also see the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Plaza make its way into Dead by Daylight as a map, as this would definitely make for a better and more complete chapter overall. I'd also like to see a new survivor be included in this chapter, since that is usually the case whenever we get new chapters added into DBD. However, it's not a guarantee, as we have seen licensed chapters in the past featuring only the killer. For example, the Leatherface and Ghostface chapters. But at this point, it is just speculation as to which animatronic will be added into DBD as the killer, and also which survivor will be added, or if there will be a map also included. So feel free to let me know your dream lineup for a Five Nights at Freddy's chapter in DBD. Moving on to the next thing that will be coming to DBD at some point in 2025, and that is a Freddy Krueger rework / buff. Much like the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter, the Freddy Krueger rework or buff is something that has been confirmed, and with us now being into the final month of the year, it seems almost certain that this will take place at some point in 2025. Freddy is a killer who started out as one of the weakest killers in Dead by Daylight history upon his release back in 2017. Back when he first released, Freddy would be forced to catch up to the survivors and press the M2 button to drag them into the dream world. Then you would have to wait a few seconds for them to fall asleep before being able to injure them. This essentially meant that you'd be hitting the survivors 3 times to eventually get the down to put them on the hook, since dragging the survivors into the dream world required you to get close to them, much like a standard M1. Freddy did eventually receive a huge buff in 2019, which made him one of the strongest killers in the entire game. With this update, Freddy no longer had to put survivors into the dream world to injure them, with the whole dream world mechanic being reworked. Freddy also now had access to either dream pallets or dream snares, as well as being able to teleport directly to generators that haven't yet been completed. However, the main thing with this rework that made Freddy so strong was the passive generator slowdown from his add-ons, specifically the jump rope and swing chains add-ons. Since 2019, Freddy has received several nerfs, not only to his add-ons but also to his base power as well, leaving Freddy once again as one of the weakest killers in the entire game. This could definitely be changing soon, however, with the planned rework / buff likely coming at some point in 2025. The next thing that will take place in 2025 is something that hasn't been confirmed and is purely speculation on my part. We just recently received a brand new survivor perk called Shoulder the Burden, and it allows you to take one of the hook states away from your teammates and apply it to yourself. This means that you can use it on someone who is on death hook and bring them back to just second hook. Since Shoulder the Burden is a new survivor perk, people are still figuring out how strong of a perk it can be, and if used by multiple survivors, you can prevent anyone getting killed off early. The only downside to Shoulder the Burden is that it does leave you exposed for 40 seconds, something that was a slight nerf from the PTB, with them changing the exposed duration from 20 seconds to 40 seconds. However, this is only a slight nerf, and once more people do start using Shoulder the Burden, I definitely believe a lot of killers will start to complain about how strong it is, which is exactly why I can see Shoulder the Burden getting a significant nerf in 2025. There's definitely a few different ways they could go about nerfing Shoulder the Burden. However, I do have something in mind which I think they'll do. Right now, Shoulder the Burden can be used once per trial per survivor, so I think they'll make it so Shoulder the Burden can be used only once per trial per team, which means it would become deactivated for the entire team once it has been used by one player. This would make it so teammates can't carry on saving other players from being on death hook multiple times per game, which would be a good balance of still keeping the perk the way it currently is, without making it extremely difficult for killers to kill off the survivors. Earlier this year, we've seen different game modes make their way into Dead by Daylight. However, by far the most popular of the newer game modes that we have seen added to DBD so far have been the 2v8 and Chaos Shuffle game modes. So with that in mind, it's almost a guarantee that these will make their way back into the game in 2025. When 2v8 returns in 2025, it's also very likely they'll make even more killers become available to play as, adding way more variety overall to the 2v8 game mode. I'm also certain that we'll see several brand new game modes added to DBD in 2025, and whilst it is speculation what exactly those game modes will be, 2v8 and Chaos Shuffle are 2 game modes that are extremely likely to make their return in 2025. Another thing that hasn't been confirmed, but instead is just speculation on my part, is a nerf to the Blight. I could definitely see a major nerf coming to one of DBD's top killers to switch up the current meta, and the Blight seems to be one of the most likely to be nerfed. One thing they could do to nerf the Blight is nerf his base movement speed down to 110%. This would definitely be a huge nerf that would see him much lower down on the tier list, but also something I could definitely see happening, along with buffs to weaker killers in order to switch up the killer meta. Blight is a killer who has been one of the strongest killers in the entire game for many years now, and a significant nerf would be a welcome change for many players. Going back to the Freddy buff that I was discussing earlier, we don't know for sure how much they're going to buff him. However, should they decide to give him a major buff, also giving a major nerf to the Blight would free up some space for Freddy near the top of the tier list. I could definitely be wrong about this one though, and they could easily give a significant nerf to another stronger killer, or just buff the weaker killers without giving any nerfs to stronger killers. However, a Blight nerf is definitely something that I predict to happen at some point in 2025. My next prediction for Dead by Daylight in 2025 is that we will finally see a Friday the 13th chapter. With the lawsuit for the Friday the 13th franchise being resolved for quite some time now, it seems just a matter of time before we eventually see a Friday the 13th chapter make its way into Dead by Daylight. Another reason as to why I can see it happening in 2025 is because of the death of the Friday the 13th video game, with that now being taken down from digital stores like the PlayStation Store, and soon to be no longer playable at all. It would definitely be reasonable to assume that the Friday the 13th license holders would now push for a chapter to be added into Dead by Daylight. There's also been a lot of talk about a Friday the 13th TV series happening. So after the franchise being stuck in limbo for many years due to the lawsuit, Friday the 13th finally looks to have a bright future ahead, with new media apparently being in the works. So I definitely think it's a matter of time before we see a Friday the 13th chapter added to Dead by Daylight. I hope I'm wrong about this next one, but I could definitely see a nerf to Windows of Opportunity happening at some point in 2025. Windows of Opportunity is currently one of the strongest survivor perks in the entire game, and it allows you to see the auras of all nearby pallets and windows, as well as see the auras of breakable walls. When Windows of Opportunity first got added into DBD, it did go on cooldown for 40 seconds after vaulting a window or dropping a pallet. This was later buffed to go on cooldown for only 20 seconds, with it later receiving another buff that would completely remove the cooldown altogether. I definitely don't think they'll nerf Windows of Opportunity into the ground, but I could definitely see them bringing back a 20-second cooldown after dropping a pallet or vaulting a window. As mentioned earlier in my prediction about the nerf to the Blight, I could definitely see them nerfing Windows of Opportunity in order to switch up the survivor meta. Whilst adding a 20-second cooldown definitely wouldn't completely kill the perk, it would likely mean that it would no longer be one of the best survivor perks in the entire game, instead giving other survivor perks their time to shine as some of the strongest survivor perks in the entire game. Something that many Survivor players have complained about lately is seeing so many of their teammates kill themselves on hook. Whenever this happens, it ruins the game for all of the survivors, since the game is now pretty much unwinnable at 3v1, but it can also ruin the game for killer, since all of the challenge is now gone. Whenever a survivor disconnects, a bot takes their place, meaning that a player disconnecting from the game gives you a much higher chance of success compared to when a player kills themselves on hook. With this in mind, I definitely think behavior will change the way hook states work in 2025. I think they'll completely remove the chance to unhook yourself with a 4% chance, which would completely stop survivors sending themselves into second phase on hook. They could also remove the skill checks that normally pop up whenever a survivor's in second phase. When this happens, survivors can just miss 2 skill checks in a row to instantly die on hook, but removing the skill checks would completely stop this from happening. The only issues with this idea would be the perks like Deliverance and Wicked would need to be changed. However, they could still have the perks activate the exact same way. The only difference is now the chance to unhook yourself would solely be reserved for perks like this, rather than taking the 4% chance. The way this would work is similar to the way you currently unhook yourself now when the anti-camping meter has been filled. Perks like Deliverance and Wicked would allow you to unhook yourself the same way you would with the anti-camping mechanic. I definitely think that Freddy won't be the only weak killer that we see get a buff at some point in 2025. So with that in mind, I do also think we'll see a buff to the Legion. The Legion is a killer that lacks in so many different ways. Not only does the Legion have almost no map pressure at all, but he also has almost no lethality since his power does nothing for downing survivors once they're injured. You can technically get a down in the power by injuring all 4 survivors with Frenzy at once and then getting an additional hit on another survivor, but this almost never happens due to the fact you need all 4 survivors killers grouped up in the same area of the map. Legion is also a killer that has been right at the bottom of the killer tier list for many years now, and is one that is long overdue a decent buff. I definitely think that a killer like Legion would be a great choice for a buff alongside Freddy. Time will tell if they do decide to buff Legion in 2025, but I have a strong feeling that Freddy won't be the only killer that we see have a major buff in 2025. Let me know if you guys think this is a bad idea, and if so, let me know which other weaker killer you would like to see buffed instead of Legion. The final thing on this list for things that we will see in DBD in 2025, and something that is very likely to happen, is more map reworks. Haddonfield is a great example of a map that is long overdue a rework due to how disliked it is by the majority of players. Haddonfield is a map that received a rework back in early 2022, and also a rework that changed the map for the worst in my opinion. Haddonfield did also see a slight change earlier on this year, but again this was a change for the worse in my opinion, since it did remove a couple of strong windows in exchange for extremely unsafe filler palettes. I could also see the Yamoka and Swamp realms being reworked in 2025, since these maps haven't been changed at all in many years. These two realms have not only become extremely stale, but they're also maps that are some of the least favorite in the entire game for both killer and survivor mains. There's definitely a lot of other options for maps they could rework, but Yamoka, the Swamp, and Haddonfield are some of the maps that I'd personally like to see reworked in 2025. Let me know in the comments down below which maps you guys would like to see reworked, and definitely let me know all of your predictions for things that will happen in DBD going into 2025. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and as always, I will see you all in the next one.